Hello again, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Noble Father Podcast. I am your host, Theophilus, and today is April the 15th of 2024. And I just wanted to start out by saying that if you're listening to this on the audio waves, know that I also upload these onto YouTube, and they're free to access, and you can see a face to the podcast if that's your thing. I'm glad to have you with me. I have no idea who you are. I don't get those statistics, obviously, but everything it took for you to be here listening to this podcast right now, know that there is great purpose and that you could learn from even a fool like me. So this week has been a wild one, right? We saw major escalations in the conflicts in the world today. Even as of a few days ago, and we're seeing more of what I call godlessness, right? And these are things that I already knew of, right? And the Bible as a historical book, a historical document, it has talked about the division when we rebelled against the Lord, against God, created a great division. And so everything we're seeing in our world today, though you may not believe, what I believe is that it's great division from God. And now we're living in lawlessness, godlessness. And it's a sign of the times. I struggle sometimes to consider reconcile within myself of how we can look at everything in our world today and know how wrong it is. Our morality is calling out to us. Our conscience is calling out to us that something is amiss here. Our spirit is in anguish, and yet we continue to deny the source of that spirit, the source of that morality, the source of good and evil. Deny no more. Today's episode, I want to talk about a topic that kind of came up. Yeah, actually, before I do, coincidence is, I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in orchestration. I believe that there is an intelligent design. And, case in point, last week I talked about the full armor of God. And it's interesting because yesterday at church, Pastor talks about the body of Christ, the armor of Christ, putting on the armor of God. No coordination whatsoever. Just so happened to talk about it, and that was his sermon, and that the Spirit was talking about that, and in talking about the body of armor, the armor of God is like, how do we contend with this world? How do we fight against the evil that lurks and is out to usurp our leadership roles in our families, and to that seeks to influence negatively the lives of our children, influence their eternal destination. And how do we do that? It's with the body and the armor of Christ. I don't know why I keep saying body. The armor of God, the full armor of God. And that's what I want to talk into today, because, yes, suiting up the armor, suiting up what God has given us to contend with the evils of this world is what's going to help us sow the right seeds, be present for the growth, be present for what the seed needs to reap the harvest that we get. And this was something that came up in my day-to-day, where in my head was just the title, the topic. I usually go through my weeks of asking, Lord, what do you want me to share about? What do you want me to talk about? And identifying the themes and the things that I see around me, and then putting it out into the airwaves, onto the Noble Father podcast. And the topic of our choices equals eternal consequences was the topic that was kind of given me. And today is going to be more of a flow episode. There were a few things that came up this week that really reiterated to me what why this topic is so important, and why we as fathers, and you might not even be a father listening to this, you might be a mother, you might be a son, you might be a daughter. This is applicable to everybody. Nothing is new. Like Ecclesiastes, the book of Ecclesiastes says, nothing is new under the sun. Like, God has seen it all. God knows what it is. God knows what has happened, what will happen, and what is happening. But there are consequences. There are grave consequences for our rebellion. And I don't speak from a place of perfection. I am not on a high horse. Please don't see me as that. I am in the muck and mire. I am in the imperfection myself. I am an imperfect being. I am a fool myself. I am every day trying not to be a fool, and yet I always find myself fulfilling that. And so we are all imperfect, and this is not a podcast about perfection. These are all things that I, in various forms, are working on myself. And in speaking to you about it, I am convicting myself and speaking into it for myself as well. And so please do not think that this is a high and mighty podcast. This is not. Noble Father is what God called me, even after all the mess ups that I had. And it gives you a sense of what God sees in us and the potential he sees in us. I mean, he's almost like he's looking in a mirror, because we are created in his image, as the Bible says. We are created in his image and in his power. And so if we are a reflection of God, I think he looks at us as this beautiful child. And though we have these imperfections, and though we have these ideologies and these things that we align ourselves to, these beliefs and these conclusions that we make about the world around us, I think God looks at those and says, that does not define you. That is not who you are. I see you as noble. I don't see you as the person guilty of sexual immorality. I don't see you as the person guilty of your addiction to substances. I don't see you. He sees us beyond all of those things. Those are all superficial things to him. And I want to lead into something right now before I go into my topic, is something that the pastor said yesterday. It was very, very insightful. And you know how I like words, and I like how words are played upon. And so given what I've just said, my pastor said yesterday, religion outside in equals death. Relationship inside out equals life. Religion outside in equals death. Relationship inside out equals life. And so I want you to think about yourself as a spiritual being. And you might be hurt by the church, and you might be one that is resistant to God, is to know that man has made a stink of that relationship and has made a religion out of a relationship, when in reality, what Jesus came to do on this plane was relationship. That Jesus was not a religion. He was not a religious person. He was a relationship person. And if you want to look at that, go to the Gospels. Go read about Jesus' life. Go read about it. His ministry only lasted 3 years, and yet it is the most profound 3 years that has ever been. So I'm going to present some scenarios, and I want to show you how easy it is to think, because I'm a very forward-thinking person. I'm also a very present person as well. I like to look at my present situation and think about what will be the result of this? What will reap if I sow this? If I do this now, what will it do then? This isn't something that I'm perfect at, right? I can't ever make the perfect decisions. And there are times where I don't feel like it, or I don't want to do it. I am just as easy to succumb to those superficial things outside in and reap a result out of that, and reap something out of that, reap something not ideal or opportune for that. So I'll use the first example I want to talk about was something that came up this week. And it was a conversation with a friend who, has nieces that, whose sibling is the parent of their children, and living under the same roof, there will come incongruences of different parenting styles. There will come incongruences of values, and of what is right or what is wrong, and hierarchies, leadership hierarchies that are different. Now, in dealing with a girl, a niece, right, and if the other sibling is a mother, you have a dynamic where uncle can be outspoken about something, but ultimately the mother has to mother, the father has to father. And so, the mothering of a child is one that came up this week, right? The child decided not to eat their lunch, and uncle was not happy about that. Uncle's rules is you must eat your food before you can have any snacks. Perfectly logical parenting decision, right? Perfectly legit, no problem. I can say, for an example, my kids do this too. My kids will do this as well. My daughter, for instance, would not eat her food and then later on ask for snacks. That is not a good parenting decision to give them snacks. And if you buckle once, they are going to take a mile with it. They are going to make you eat your words. They will push your boundary. Now, the father may not be there. And so child is upset and starts crying, whining, goes to mother and demands that she gets food because she's not getting enough. Oh, I'm so sad. I'm so sorry. It's such a pity. Woe is me. And when mother steps in that way, you as uncle can't really say anything. It's not your position. You are out of line if you do. And because father's not saying anything, and it's also mother to daughter, that mother buckles, succumbs to it, and gives daughter a snack, gives niece a snack. And so, if we were to play that out, right, what will that reap later on? Okay, so we have the dynamic of mom's words is greater than that of a man's voice. And because dad has not spoken, dad has not verbalized or stepped into that leadership role, then in the eyes of that daughter, then mother's words supersedes the father's word. Now, I'm not speaking here of man is greater than woman. Okay, like it's not, don't take it to that extreme and say that, oh, Theo is misogynistic or whatever, and says that they are not equals. In reality, we aren't. God created man, then created a helper for man. And when woman stepped out of line and ate the fruit that was not supposed to be eaten, God didn't go to the woman. God went to the man because he is the leader. And so, what is equal? Could you ever really be equal? Like you just can't. There's just no way. Each has its own domain. God knows each has its own domain, right? Man can't bear a child, and the father is called to be the leader of the household. So we play that out, right? Daughter is going to see mom's word supersedes dad's leadership role. Dad's voice is to be quiet and not say anything. And whenever I want something as a child, I ask my mom. And that power dynamic, you can imagine what that does later on. Respect for man in the relationship is going to be non-existent. And what does that look like later on? It will look like, just think about what kind of marriage and what kind of man this little girl is going to grow up looking for. Not that they won't correct it, but just imagine what that looks like. We already have examples of that in society today, right? Is man's voices shouldn't listen to him, right? And you know what? Like, admittedly, sometimes, yeah, I'm an imperfect man as well. I'm an imperfect father as well. And sometimes the things I say, the advice I give is not good advice. And, it causes my wife to think that, excuse me, like, what are you saying? Like, are you sure you want to say that? We need that. We need that as men to grow. We need that as leaders to change the way that we talk and the way we lead our families. But the eventuality is dangerous. So you can think about the eternal consequences of that, right? Because, and you can think about mom too. What was mom's upbringing like, right? You can wonder what her childhood was like. If this is okay, and you don't see the repercussions from something like this, you don't see the eternal consequences from doing that. What's that going to look like one day? It's not going to be a good result. And just the internal consequences of that is just, it's scary to think, because, generations and generations will go on like that, right? Then that's not what we need. And so I'm going to propose some other scenarios, and we're going to talk through them. And these are things that I have not scripted. I just wrote them down as scenarios and talk through them. What would we reap if we sowed these things? Okay, so inconsistencies in raising boys and girls. Inconsistencies being treating, let's just say, as a father, treating my daughter in a softer way than I treat my son, and letting her get away with things that my son wouldn't get away with. So what is that? What are we sowing? So we're sowing inconsistency. We're sowing incongruence in the way that we raise both different genders. First and foremost, it could give the impression that, to my son, that being a male is a bad thing. Or being a female is a bad thing. If I, only pick on my daughter and I don't pick on my son, or I'm harder on my daughter than I am on my son, or harder on my son than I am on my daughter. Obviously from me to my son, I will be harder on him because I understand what it means to be a man. And I need to make sure that when he butts up against me, that that I meet him where he is at, and be careful to not allow him to break boundaries and push past those things. If you haven't heard some of my earlier podcasts, go listen to the one where I talk about the elephants, right? And you find the topic of that. And if you don't want to listen to that, go look up Pilanesberg Elephant Experiment. Pilanesberg Elephant Experiment. Pilanesberg or Burg. And it was an experiment done on elephants. They'd culled all these alpha male elephants because they wanted to move elephants in the reserve. The alpha males were too big, and so they moved young males, young females, and mothers to a new reserve. And they noticed that elephants were dying. Rhinoceros in the reserve were dying. Strange. They didn't know who was killing them. It wasn't poachers. It just there's something was happening in the reserve. What they came to find out later on was that the young males who had been raised without alpha males to butt up their testosterone up against, ended up killing hyperaggression towards other animals, and namely rhinos on the reserve. And they were forming gangs, and they were, this macho bravado. And what ended up happening was they introduced a Big Brother program where they brought in alpha males from other reserves, and these alpha males started to set these males in their place, started to set them straight, and that's whenever the killings completely stopped, and there was no more. Now, take that example and put it to the world. Australia just had a massive, had a terrible, heinous stabbing incident just a few days ago, 2 days ago maybe, where a man went in and started stabbing women and children. Apparently, they're saying that he was targeting females only. And so you we see these examples, right? America dealing with the shootings, stabbings in other parts with violence, heinous acts of violence by males, predominantly males. If you look at them all, most of them are all conducted by males. Um, that shows you the absence of the father. The absence of the father is what causes that. Now, so we're talking about the inconsistency in raising boys and the girls. Without the father there raising a son proper, you leave them to fend for themselves. Now, the same could be said about a daughter. Just watch this reel about this girl talking about how she loves selling herself online and likes to be an exhibitionist. And Charlie Kirk, this guy who I think you'd call an apologist, maybe also a guy who goes around and debates and talks about common sense and why things are the way they are, and tries to fight against those things. Asked her one single question, it's like, what was your relationship with your father like? And her response obviously was there was no relationship with her father. I haven't talked to him in a long time, and to him he was just like, I'm not surprised. A daughter seeks the approval, not the approval, but seeks the eye of the father. The father gives her self-esteem, gives her self-respect, and is a daughter's first love. A father must show her that affection, and show her what a man should see in her, and that's why the daughter wears the dress and she does her twirls and shows off when she does her makeup and plays in such a way, because she is seeking that first male approval, and that first male approval is from a father. A father has to give that. Without that, the daughter's going to be left without it, and she'll go into the world and seek that somewhere else. And in the evil of our world, there's no telling where that goes. There's no telling. We have evidence of that. OnlyFans, pornography, Playboy, like all these things. These are all things that we already have evidence of. So if you want a sample size, just look at all those industries. Ask those ladies, how's your relationship with your father? Right? And if they say, oh, it was a great relationship with the father, that's not possible. It's just not. And so that is an eternal thing too as well, right? Now you imagine this girl who sold herself online, and her pictures or videos and stuff are all over the internet. What are the eternal consequences of that, right? In their youth, posting all these pictures, what does that do for this child, right? Or if this lady becomes a mother one day, what are the children gonna think? What are they gonna say, right? Mom's pictures are all over the internet. Imagine going to school and kids find out that your mother has nude photos or explicit videos all over the internet. What is the eternal consequence of that, right? What does that do to the child? What does that do to a child looking for a wife one day, right? To a son looking for a wife one day. What kind of woman do you think he'll find? What kind of relationship do you think he'll have with her? What kind of respect do you think this son is going to have for this woman, right? It's a scary conclusion, and one in which we don't know. Another scenario, letting screens babysit our children, right? What does that look like, right? Well, I can tell you what it looks like because I see it in my extended family as well. Sitting down around the dinner table, kids won't eat. Why won't they eat? Because there's no screen on the table. And when they have the screen on the table, they eat. They mindlessly eat. They're almost like zombies. They don't focus. They're focused on the screen, and they're just mindlessly eating like that. Well, what is the eternal consequence of that? Well, later on in life, sitting around the TV to eat meals and not watching what you're eating. Oh, quick food then, because we want to get to the screen as fast as we can. Nobody wants to prepare food. Nobody likes to wash their vegetables. Nobody likes to go to the grocery store and get vegetables, everything. It's just put in a microwave dinner and sit in front of the TV and eat anything, as long as it gets me to the point of being full, right? Oh, Now we have Uber Eats, and we just order food and eat, and then we can watch TV while it gets delivered to us. We don't have to worry about it. Exercise? Pff, who cares about exercise, right? Boom. Immediately. That conclusion, that consequence of engaging screens for our kids at an early age enables them to not take care of their diet, not take care of their physical health, makes them lazy, not, and also delaying of gratification. There's no delay of gratification. This is just when I want to watch something or whenever I want to eat, I turn on the TV, right? There's it's almost muscle memory for us. Growing up, here's an example. Growing up, when I was reading books, I'd just get tired. I'd just fall asleep. Reading books. And so every time I opened a book, I would yawn. I wouldn't be tired, but I would just yawn for whatever reason. And I'm so guilty of this, actually. I'll open a book and I'll yawn. Old habits die hard, and I just get really tired. The body remembers, the mind remembers. And so if screens is the first thing we reach for to babysit our kids, they're not going to be social. They're not going to learn how to fight boredom. My kids are already dealing with that. We only limit them to 2 days a week on the weekends to have their screen time. And even yet, I still feel like maybe it's a little too much, right? And in reading the book, Coddling of the American Mind, screens with social media and the dopamine overload. It may be what is causing depression and anxiety in young children today, right? And the side of things of being a human. Being a human we're a social species, and it's interesting because I see this in my kids. After their long screen times, anything over like 2 hours, my kids forget how to interact with one another, and they're irritable, and they are very, very on edge with one another. So they lose how to be social. Think about the eternal consequence of that. We're seeing it right now in our young people today. We don't, as men, going back hundreds of years, we just don't talk about the deep things of the things that plague us, the things that bother us, the things that are on our mind. Even less so now with teens. Teens are they don't know how to talk. They don't know how to interact with people. Their eyes are fixed on the screens. They need it for their survival. I want to be fast here because I don't want to take up too much of your time. Helicoptering our children, right? Everything, happening around them. Oh, they fall and we go and pick them up, or, overseeing the dangers that they encounter in the world. Stepping in whenever we don't need to, whenever they need to learn a lesson, we step in and do the lesson for them. That's how you have 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds living at home still. This stabbing that happened in Australia, this guy was 40 years of age. From the sounds of it, sounds like this person didn't know how to live on their own, had no idea how to take care of themselves, and was left grasping for life with mental illness, mind you. How do you contend with the world at that point? You don't. You grasp. And when you are at a loss of words and loss of hope, and you've lost all hope for your life, violence becomes a very possible conclusion. You think, well, what's the point of all this then? If there's no point to anything, then what does it matter if I go into a mall and stab people, women and children? And a 9-month-old was one of the victims. How senseless can we be, right? When you don't feel those emotions, well, then it doesn't matter what you feel. That is a conclusion of that. Forcing lost identity on your children, and this, the parents' failed dreams being forced upon the kid. One of the stories came up this week of like a father who was very much into soccer and had failed dreams or maybe didn't pursue the dreams, for missed opportunities or maybe injuries or what have you, and pushed his desire for soccer onto the children. So you can imagine, what does that do to a child, right? This child doesn't want any, and this child is forced to run endless laps and just, you've seen those, right? Hockey parents or the soccer parents that just like super outspoken, super loud on their children and trying to get them to do better or what have you. And it's just forcing of identity onto a child that they don't necessarily want or don't need. And so you can imagine what future looks like, right? This child grows up and doesn't want anything to do with soccer because this was not what they wanted. I'm a good example of this, right? Growing up as a pastor's kid, that lifestyle was not something I wanted for myself. And so whenever I turned 18, I forced myself away. I pushed myself away from the church. I wanted nothing to do with it. And it wasn't my parents' fault. Lead a child in the way they should go. And then when they get older, they will not stray from it. There was foundations that my parents wanted to give. Now, was the way of doing it correct? Maybe not. And could anybody learn? My parents were imperfect as well. And so do I fully blame them for where I ended up? No, absolutely not. I think God took me on that journey too to get me to where I am today, to be speaking into Noble Father the way that I'm doing and leading in the environments that I'm a part of the way that I'm leading. So there's great purpose that comes about from that. But that's to get you thinking that there are eternal consequences from it. There are, in the ways that we step out of line and the way that we don't parent properly, that there are consequences. And something that happened this week, and this was my last example, is, my daughter was sick for most of the week. I think she didn't go back until Thursday. And on Wednesday, she came over while I was working here. She comes over and says, "Daddy, can you take me skating?" This child is sick. And she comes to me and asks me to go skating. "So are you really sick?" And I said, "No, you are not. We're not going skating. You are sick. You need to be going back to school. You need to be focused on recovering. I'm not taking you skating." Now, of course, when a kid doesn't get their way, what is the first thing they go? The automatic reflex reaction is to whine and pout and to try to get their way through whining. That doesn't fly in my house. It doesn't just work. Now, you can imagine there are families out there that will allow it. They will let them get what they want. For one, it's a bad precedent that we're setting, because then my child can just say, "I'm sick," feign it, right? Pretend that they're sick and get their way. "I'm not going to school today," because they want to watch a TV or they get to go skating. And if the parent succumbs to that, golly, like, what limit is there to what they can say and what you're willing to do for them? There is no limit, right? And so what foundation does that set? Is that if I whine and I cry, I can get whatever I want. And mom and dad aren't serious. They're not worthy of respect. Think about that, right? Doesn't that give the illusion that you are not a leader? You've essentially given your power over to your child, and now your child rules you. So whatever they want, they get, because you always give it to them. That consequence is ridiculous, because what's going to happen for them one day? They're going to have kids one day, and they're just going to succumb as well, because you've shown them a great example of doing that. So just think about everything that you're doing. Be present about it, because even the smallest, most minuscule decisions that you make, even financial decisions that you make, all impact eternally the results that they grow up in themselves. The values and the things, the beliefs that you believe in, have eternal consequences. You'll hear me talk about this all the time. Are you willing to be wrong about God? You may be resistant to it. That's okay. But are you willing to be okay with being wrong about that belief, about those values? Because the spiritual well-being, the eternal well-being of your children rests in your hands. And so because you have this church hurt that man was the cause of and not God, you grow resistant to going back to church. You blame God for it. That has a consequence for your children. That impacts them as well. Your choices have eternal consequences. Every decision that we make has a result. By saying yes to something, we say no to something else. By saying no to something else, we say yes to something else. And that is what I want fathers and parents to really think about. What decisions are you making together, right? Is your marriage having problems? Oh, yes, it is. Get help. Get it fixed. What decisions are you making? What choices are you making together? How can you fix this scenario? How can we show our children how a marriage should look like? When a marriage encounters problems, how can we fix it? What do we do about it? What can be solved here? How can we show our children the example moving forward? In everything that you do, you set an example. And so that's really all I wanted to share. You don't like me breathing down your neck, but a lot of what I've said is for myself as well. Always constantly catching myself and asking myself, why did you make a decision this way? And what does this mean? What are the implications of this decision? And if I choose to go down this route, am I okay with the eventual harvest of what that would sow? And thinking from that perspective. And if we did take more time to think about those things and those decisions that we make, we would be less willing to give them screen time. We'd be less willing to renege on foundations, values, right? We would be more present with them. If you genuinely care for your children, you would step up in that manner. And I hope you step up in that manner. And if you need anybody to, brush up against with that, get feedback on scenarios like that, what does that look like? Maybe you're not forward thinking. Feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook. It's widely transparent who I am and what I'm about. And I am not one to speak what you want to hear. I am going to speak what you need to hear. And I'm going to be earnest, just as I would expect from you. I would expect honest feedback from you about things that I'm not doing well. And I only dish it because I can take it. And so if you're coming to me, you better be ready to be dished out truth in any form of candor and in honesty, because I'm not here to play falsehood or buy into your co-sign your BS. I'm not here to co-sign it. I'm not here to make your life easier. I want your life to have good results, and so I'm going to speak into that, just as I expect from you. And so if you're able to share this with people that you think would benefit them, that'd greatly help the podcast. I am very passionate about this work, and if you have any feedback about this episode, please let me know. Please send me a message. Any kind of message keeps me going as well. And thank you for tuning in today. I hope that this week you find yourself well, and know that I'm always here for you. And remember that we're not promised tomorrow, so be present and stay noble. Thank you.